As always, friends, today's video does contain subject matter that some viewers may find disturbing, and viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a story you would like to send my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And as always, thank you. Hey all. I wanted to share something that me and a few friends experienced in high school. I think I was a bit of a weirdo in school, but I wasn't alone. I had plenty of friends that accepted my weirdness and were probably just as equally goofballs. We were the ones using paper clips and safety pins as earrings, drawing creepy stuff, and other probably edgy things. I cringe at the thought of my teenage years now. Anyways, while we may have been odd, we still wanted to enjoy the events that our school had, such as fundraisers, parades, and, yes, even prom. A couple of my friends and I all agreed to go to prom together, and one of my friends even tried to hook me up with this girl that I'd been interested in. He'd asked her if she was available. Well, actually, he told her that I was asking, and she said yes. So our first date would be prom, I guess. I actually gave a little more care as to how I looked and even got a matching tie for her corsage. I picked her up from her place and we met our friends at the community center where they were having the dance. My date was stunning, and it was hard to believe that she was with me. She said that I looked good, and even some of the teachers that were there told me that I cleaned up well and joked that they wished they saw me more like this. I wasn't the best student, but I wasn't really a troublemaker either. We were all having a great night, between dancing, flirting, eating some of the food, and just BSing with each other. At one point while we were talking, I noticed a guy that seemed kind of out of place. Even the teachers and adults were dressed nicely, and this guy was just in jeans and a suit jacket. I watched as he walked along the wall, looking around, almost like he was trying to find somebody. But it was the way that he held himself and looked around that had me on edge. There was an eerie intensity to his gaze at everyone that made me feel like he had no good intentions. Now, while he looked very off-putting, no one else was looking at him or watching him, so I was starting to think that maybe it was just me. I tried to brush it off as just being prom jitters and thinking maybe I was just on edge due to the circumstances. So, at the time, I just let it go. I continued dancing and talking with my friends, and at one point, we found a table and about 6 of us were sitting at it. My date had her legs on my lap, complaining that they were hurting as she'd been wearing heels. While talking, I spotted the suit jacket guy again, and also noticed that he was walking towards us. I looked back at my friends, trying to find a time to ask if they recognized him, but he stood next to my date's chair and greeted us before I had the chance. He asked us if we were enjoying ourselves, and we all said yeah. He brought up a few things like the music and one of the drink stations, and we conversed for a few. As the conversation died down, the guy then asked us what we were going to be doing after the dance, which I thought was kind of an odd question. One of my friends mentioned that we'd probably just go chill somewhere, and then the guy asked us if we wanted to go with him to go smoke. Now, I know everyone at the table, including myself, did, but it was really weird to have an adult offer this to us. We all kind of side-eyed one another, and I spoke up first and said, "Nah, we're good. Thanks, though." And no one else said anything. He then pushed it, again offering. He said it wasn't a setup or anything, and specifically pointed at me and said, "I know you like grass, boy, don't lie," and started laughing. This accusation did not make me feel more comfortable about him either. In fact, the way that he looked at me and pointed at me, it made me think like it was more about intimidation, like he had something on me. And so without looking away from him or smiling like I did the first time, I just said, "No one's lying, man. We're just not interested." I was hoping that he might get the hint, and I wanted him to leave us alone. He didn't. He then focused on my date. He complimented her on her looks, and she seemed a little standoffish, but was being polite to the guy. Until he started making more explicit comments to my date and the other girls. She'd put her legs down and seemed to push her back more towards me, as if she was nervous that this guy was close to her. Nobody was saying anything. Being that I was already suspicious of this dude, I was now annoyed that he was not getting the hint. So I stood up, called him a few names, and told him to leave. I also very loudly made a comment about him hitting on teens and stood there, hoping he would finally get the hint. Or at least maybe another adult would come over. The guy again laughed as he stood up and said that if we changed our minds, we could meet him at a certain park. I watched as he walked away, but also noticed our gym teacher starting to walk over to us. He asked us who that guy was, and I basically asked him the same thing. I thought he was another staff member, or part of the faculty chaperoning the dance, since he was obviously an adult. The gym teacher then hollered for the creep and started walking toward him, and he took off. Our gym teacher then ran after him too, and we were left wondering who that guy was. And we all tried to loosen up again, hoping that wouldn't completely sour our night, but we then had another teacher approach us saying that we needed to follow them because they had more questions about what had just happened. After we explained it all to them, they told us that they were handling it and to go back to the dance and enjoy our time. Thankfully, we were able to have a good rest of the night, but when we separated afterwards, I was still left wondering about this guy. Who was he? How did he end up at the prom without any of the other teachers or other students feeling like he didn't belong? I spotted him pretty quickly, and I knew that something wasn't right. I was kicking myself for not reporting him sooner, but I didn't know all the people that worked for the school or the district, so I just assumed I was being paranoid. That was until the following week when I was called into the principal's office, where I saw one of my other friends from that night and a police officer. The principal said the officer wanted to know more about the incident and asked for a description of the man. After explaining all this, the officer showed us a picture of a guy. It was an obvious mugshot, and it was the same person. They thanked us for our explanation and sent us off back to class. That day, my mom picked me up from school and asked us about the cop at the school and what all he said. I told her about the incident at prom, and so she was already aware, but she said that she had also gotten an email that the school sent out to everyone about this guy. It mentioned that they had a suspicious and unidentified person in the area that was also reported by students, and that they reacted quickly by calling the authorities. Later that night, a cop had actually stopped behind a car that was parked near our school with all their lights off and questioned them. Our gym teacher saw the guy leaving in a car and gave them the details as well. The car and the guy matched the description, so they detained him. They sent the email letting them know that he was still in custody after being identified by witnesses, and that if they had any other questions, they could call the school, or the officer that was handling the case. It was a relief to know that this guy wasn't out walking around, but also creeped me out just that much more, knowing that he was still nearby. Like, he was waiting. I wanted to include this, but of course I can't confirm the validity of it, as it was all from word of mouth. One of my friends said that their parents called the officer, and they told them that they searched his car and found rope, duct tape, and a knife, as well as condoms and some weed. The weed at least matches up to the story that he was feeding us that night, but if that information was true, then what the hell was he planning? It sends shivers down my spine thinking what could have happened if any of us had gone with him that night. For the most part, it was a fantastic night, but it was also pretty memorable for us. From then on, I promised myself that if anything ever seemed off, especially when it comes to another person like that, I would tell someone immediately. I'm glad that no one went with him that night, but it's always in the back of my mind of what could have happened. This happened to me and two of my friends back when we were in high school. It was nearing the end of our school year, which meant not only were our last finals around the corner, but so was prom. We were seniors, and I unfortunately missed going to my junior year prom due to a family emergency, so I was not going to let anyone or anything stop me, or ruin my night. My friends Marissa, Heidi, and I all went and picked out dresses together, and not only coordinated colors with our dates, but with each other. We all met up at my place to get ready, and then our dates met us at a local park to take pictures and hang out shortly before the dance started. While we were there, Heidi pulled out her purse and showed us that her mom had bought her a few shooters. In case anyone doesn't know what that is, it's those mini bottles of liquor. She was supposed to keep them at home. Her mom let her drink occasionally, but only when she was at home and within her sight. She passed one out to all of us and quickly took the shots and got rid of the evidence. Afterwards, we were headed to the school. The prom itself was a blast, with your normal teenage fun times. We danced, took pictures, made my ex mad, all stupid fun. It was probably close to the end of the dance, so I think it was just a combination of people being worn out and teenage angst that some people started getting a bit more rowdy. Some girls started shouting at Marissa, so we all joined in to try to get her to leave with us so we didn't get into any trouble. Thankfully, she went pretty easily when Heidi bribed her with more shots. She said that we could all go back to her place and have some more to drink and just hang out, so that was our plan. The three of us girls piled into my car, and the guys said that they would meet us there in their car, after they went home to change. We left the school probably feeling a bit too invincible. Again, we were stupid teenagers doing some pretty stupid stuff. Physically, I felt fine though. I know I shouldn't have, and I don't condone our actions that night, but we'd only had the one shot before the dance and nothing since, so I wasn't even buzzed. We all got in the car with me driving, Marissa in the passenger seat, and Heidi in the back. We expected a nice ride as close friends celebrating our high school years. But that wouldn't be the case. I stopped at a four-way intersection at the same time as a car that was coming from the opposite direction. I flashed my lights at them so that they could go, but they continued to sit there. After flashing my lights again and no movement, I decided to go ahead and turn left. They didn't have a turn signal on, so I assumed that they were going to go straight, which is why I was trying to let them go first. After I turned, I then noticed that the car had turned behind me, too. I was more focused on my friends and driving, however, so I made a sort of a mental note and continued talking and singing. It didn't last long, though, as I noticed the car was following pretty closely, so I pointed it out to my friends. Marissa, being the aggressive type, told me to tap on the brakes to get them to back off. And normally I would, but for some reason I kept telling myself that I shouldn't. Now, it was pretty dark at this point, so I couldn't make out much of the car other than the front of it looked dark. Like maybe black or dark blue or even gray, maybe. We quickly learned why they may have been tailgating me when the lights kicked on. Again, between it being dark and not really paying much attention, I didn't notice that there were lights on top of the car. In a slight panic, I pulled over and told the girls to just keep quiet. I turned off the music and immediately went to reach for my purse that was in the back passenger side. I had already rolled down my window by the time the cop approached my side of the car and immediately shined his bright flashlight right into my front seat. I turned quickly to look at them and greet them, but they then put the flashlight right in my face. I squinted and put my hands up, as a bit of a force of habit when there's something bright in your face. But the cop immediately got aggressive and yelled at me to put my hands down. It startled me, but I did as he said and tried to apologize and mentioned the light. He then pointed it towards the back at Heidi and then kind of laughed, claiming that he was just messing with us. I looked over at Marissa really quick and saw the WTF look on her face, and quickly looked back at the cop. He asked if we were leaving the ball and laughed again, and I told him that we were actually headed home from our prom. At this point, he was still shining his flashlight around in my car, so I couldn't quite see his face. I could see a slight outline, and I could see his teeth, so I could at least tell that he was smiling. He made some kind of back-in-my-day comment. I don't remember it exactly, but then laughed again. We all just sat there awkwardly, and I really wanted to ask him why he pulled us over, but I didn't have it in me. And since he seemed to be in a good mood, maybe he would just forget, or let us go. I wasn't speeding. I used my signal when I turned, and none of us were, hanging out the windows or screaming either. As he cleared his throat, he leaned down to have his head closer to my window and asked, "Have you ladies been drinking?" Okay, now, I know how some people may respond to this, but I was an 18-year-old girl at the time. I was underage, and we definitely had something to drink. It was literally one shot each of us, and it was several hours earlier, so I felt fine, but between the nights so far, being pulled over, the adrenaline, and anxiety was high, I was beginning to freak out. However, my response was immediately, "No." He leaned in closer and his voice became a bit more stern and he said, "Now don't you lie to me. I'm not stupid. I could smell the alcohol in this car." I began having an internal meltdown, worried that I was going to go to jail and that my parents would find out, but I immediately started pleading. I fessed up. I told him that I had just had one shooter and that it was earlier that night, and that we were going straight home so there wouldn't be any more, and I kept apologizing. Marissa tried telling me to shut up, but once I started, I couldn't turn it off. After a few minutes of my pathetic pleas, the cop stopped me and told me that, while he appreciated me telling the truth, he was going to have to arrest all of us and have the car towed. Heidi then began begging with me to let us go with the tickets, and Marissa was more seeming to argue with us. Then, he did that ear-piercing whistle, making us all stop and look back at him. He then leaned down, putting his arms on my window, and said, "I would hate to ruin your girls' nights, so maybe we can work something out." I was expecting him to just give me a ticket, which still would have sucked, but at least I was much more willing to tell my parents about that. However, he had something else in mind. He mentioned an empty building with a pretty empty area. It was where an old mall had closed, and he asked us if we would follow him there and just have some fun for a bit. Forget the ticket or going to jail. I was even more terrified at this point. Was this cop really suggesting what I thought he was suggesting? I was frozen at this point, not knowing how to react. What would happen if I told him no? Would he then arrest me? But, of course, Marissa, being her normal aggressive self, took over. She leaned down pretty far to look at this guy and pretty much challenged him and started going off. Some of the berating from her included, "You know we're minors, right? We just told you we were coming from prom. I'm recording this, so why don't you explain in detail what exactly you were wanting us to do? Why did you even pull us over? Don't you have to give us a breath test before you can do anything? Ash, don't get out of the car. Don't do anything unless he makes you take a test. You know, what's your name anyways? I want your name and badge number. The cop got pretty quiet at that point, and then tried laughing again and said that we were pretty smart girls. He tried to play it off about testing us or something and then said that we were free to go, but to just be careful and to go straight home. He never told us his name nor his badge number. We waited for him to get back into his car, and when he didn't drive off, I decided to go. Part of me was worried that he might follow, but I just wanted to get home at this point. The guys obviously beat us to Heidi's, and we told them what happened. They thought that it was really suspicious too, but other than them, we never told anyone about this interaction. I myself was too worried my parents would be mad at me or something. So, fast forward a few months after we graduated. There was something on the news about someone impersonating a cop, and when they pulled over women, they would make suggestive comments and threaten them with erroneous charges unless they agreed to his demands. One lady dared to challenge him, much like Marissa did, but he actually grabbed her by the arm, leaving marks, and tried to open her door. They said that she was able to drive away, and she immediately went to a police station to report it. But when she explained everything, the officer she talked to wasn't convinced that it was a real officer. Then, they started getting more reports, and they all lined up. Someone also was able to see the vehicle, and it was all dark with no markings. Like, it was an unmarked cop car. But the problem is that the state that I live in, those are prohibited, which led them to believe even more that it wasn't real. Unfortunately, he must have realized that they were on to him, because the reports stopped and they never caught the guy. I told Marissa and Heidi about this, and Marissa was confident that it was the same guy. The scheme, the location, it all matched with what we experienced. So, I'm also pretty confident it was the same person. The situation alone freaked me out, but when I saw that, I was even more terrified that this was real. This happened to many women, but then I wondered how many more it happened to that didn't report it, and even worse, how many poor women fell for it and followed through. I'm an adult now and much smarter, so when I do have an interaction with someone of law enforcement, I make sure to note as many details as possible, and to get their name. You just never can be too careful, no matter who the person may appear to be. So, I'll start this off by saying that when this happened, I was a senior in high school, and was just shy of turning 18. It was prom night, the night that everyone had been waiting for from the first day that the plans for the night came to be. I had a sparkly dress, one that I thought was the most gorgeous dress that I had ever seen. All my guy friends were in full suits, and we were all feeling like we were on top of the world. I mean, why wouldn't we? This was the peak of our last year of high school. We were all dressed like we were upper class, all while living in pretty much the middle of nowhere in the Midwest. The night was young, the music was loud, and everyone was having a blast. The school had gone all out, transforming the gym into a fairy tale ballroom, which was actually the theme that our class had agreed on. Everything was pastel pink and blue. There were balloons, the tables were all decorated. The entire room was like this bubble of pure bliss and excitement. And through all of this, we were all completely unaware of what was brewing outside. The weather forecast had mentioned that there could be some nighttime storms, but this was the Midwest. Thunderstorms in the spring are as common as a trip to McDonald's. It happens more or less once a week. No one really thought much of it, least of all me, especially while I was getting lost in the moment with my girlfriend. We were all enjoying the night, having a lovely time, when the power kind of flickered. It wasn't anything major, just a bit of a dim and then back up. A couple of girls jokingly screamed to add to the drama of the moment, and we all laughed. Until the lights dimmed again. The music stuttered and then all the lights just completely shut off before the emergency lighting kicked back on. The entire room was filled with this sickly greenish hue as we all just kind of looked around confused, like, are we really going to lose power on prom night? The room slowly did grow quieter as we waited for things to come back, but that silence was broken by that disgustingly loud, piercing wail of the tornado sirens. That first blast of sound was enough to make me feel like my heart was going to stop. It's not that I hadn't heard them before, they were just always so loud and unanticipated. Our vice principal, Ms. Haig, came over the intercom. Her voice was normally stern and kind of aggressive, but when she came over the speaker, her voice actually sounded slightly shaken. She told everyone to remain calm and to proceed down the stairs and into the south hallway, which was basically the band and drama hall. We all looked at each other, and after a few nervous laughs, we realized that this was pretty serious. That change in atmosphere was jarring. From a night of celebration, we were suddenly plunged into a night of uncertainty and dread. We all made our way down the stairs and into the band hall. The teachers that were helping with the night were guiding us down and into the specific places down in the shelter. We all huddled together, an uneasy silence settling over the group. The air was heavy, filled with a palpable fear of what was happening. I didn't realize how freaked out I was until my girlfriend asked if I was okay and mentioned how tightly I was squeezing her hand. This was supposed to be a night of fun, a night of us all just letting loose and spending quality time with those that we'd come to know, but there we were, wondering if this night could be our last. As the storm raged on, you could honestly feel the building shake. You could hear the deafening roar of the wind. Time seemed to slow down and minutes stretched into what felt like hours. And there were moments when the whole building felt like it shuddered with this intense pressure, followed by several moments of quiet. We all held our breaths, praying, holding each other, and just waiting. After a bit, the all clear did come over the intercom, but that dreadful feeling definitely stuck around. Going back up and emerging from the school, it felt like stepping onto a movie set from some post-apocalyptic film. The once familiar parking lot was unrecognizable, strewn with debris, cars flipped, and what could only be described as a small taste of what happened throughout our town. Houses were torn apart, trees were uprooted, power lines were downed, and people's lives completely destroyed. Miraculously, there were no casualties. Just a town full of shaken and distressed people, and a high school full of teenagers trying to piece together how this night that was supposed to be a moment of youthful innocence could turn into the most terrifying night of our lives. All of this was a harsh reminder of how things can quickly take a sharp turn, how life can take that sudden turn when you least expect it. Even now, years later, I can't really think about that night without getting that anxious feeling that I felt in those hallways. It was meant to be a night of celebration, joy, one last hurrah with everyone before we graduated, and yet it was a night of devastation and stark reality. I'll never forget that moment when my mom pulled up to the school and saw me, and how she started bawling when she wrapped me in a tight hug. We were one of the lucky ones in that our house was mostly untouched. There was minor damage to the roof shingles, and we lost half of a tree in our backyard, but most weren't so fortunate. Some lost cars, some whole houses. and we all came together as a community offering hospitality to those that lost their homes and hoping to clean up and rebuild as quickly as we could. It may sound dramatic to some, but that night honestly felt like a clear line had been drawn. A line between life before and life in our town after. After all was said and done, we did still have a graduation ceremony, and we all still had to apply to our colleges, and we still had to finish out our finals. Yet, it all seemed so trivial compared to what we had gone through. It's been years since that night, and our town has completely regrown and rebuilt. Thankfully, we haven't had another tornado rip through our town like that. Plenty of harsh storms and several tornado watches, but nothing like that night. I'll finish this out by mentioning that the only reason I thought about typing this story up is that my daughter is now in her senior year, and her prom is coming up. Even worse, the class actually decided on fairy tale ballroom as the theme, so that hit a bit close to home for me. Now, odds are, it'll be a night like any other and it will go off without issues. But part of me is still a bit paranoid that something could happen. I've got a plethora of high school memories. Some great, some terrible, but there was one memory that has always stuck with me because of how different it could have gone. In one of my classes, I was paired with someone during an assignment that I don't normally associate with. I gave a quick grimace to my friend in the class, wanting to be able to choose who I was paired with, of course, but then moved over to the seat next to my new partner. Let's call her Kayla. I'm gonna try to make this short, but I just wanted to give a little backstory on Kayla and I that led up to the incident this story is about. I didn't have any problems with Kayla, as I didn't really even know her. I also can't really recall her hanging out or talking with anyone else. She usually kept to herself. She went to classes on time, packed up right before the bell rang, but never earlier, not even in the last period. She rode her bike to and from school, and during lunch, she usually sat on the window ledge, closest to the entrance. Sometimes I saw a girl sitting with her at lunch or talking with her in the hallways, but that was it. At least for most of the interactions that she had. She didn't really do anything odd in class either, so as harsh as this is going to sound, she kind of just blended in with everyone else that I didn't associate with. So, when I moved over to her, she didn't say much. We started discussing different topics to cover, and she typically just agreed with anything I chose, or said things like, "Yeah, whatever, works for you, whatever you want to do, that's fine." I couldn't really decide if she was easy to work with at the time or more difficult, because I had to make a lot of the decisions. But then, when it came time for the actual work, she was on top of it. We had a week to gather our materials for the first part, but she came in the next day with her information completely put together. It was impressive. I made a comment about it to her, and she seemed upset or maybe embarrassed, and I asked her what was wrong, and she mentioned something about me being sarcastic. I wasn't, though. I was being genuine with her. Over the course of the assignment, we worked better and more thoroughly together, but she still really didn't talk much. I was used to at least some small talk or goofing around, but every time I tried, she would shut me down. I won't get into it, but I will say that there was an incident at school involving Kayla where she tripped coming into the school, and I went over to help her and ask her if she was okay. And it seemed to surprise her that I did this. I don't know what shifted, but from then on, she began talking and opening up more about herself. I even invited her over to my place to finish up our assignment and to hang out, wanting to get to know her better. Not only was she highly intelligent, but she was also very kind and pretty funny. So as we grew closer, so did prom. I mentioned going, and she always shied away from the topic. She said that she wasn't planning on going, but I wasn't going to take no for an answer. I may not have known why she was so reclusive, but she really was a fun girl, so I convinced her to go. My mom and I even took her so that we could get dresses together. We had all these plans as we put it all together, and I could tell that she began to light up more and more to this idea. So, cutting to the actual night of the prom. I offered to have my mom pick her up, but she declined, saying that she would have her mom bring her and we would just meet up there. I got ready to go. My friends stopped by my place to take some pictures with me and ended up taking me to the school instead. When we arrived, I immediately started looking around for Kayla, but I didn't see her. I wasn't too worried about it, as it was still early. It was probably about half an hour into the dance, though, and I still hadn't seen her. I forgot to mention that this was also back when cell phones weren't really a big thing that most kids had. Like, they existed, but it was more so adults, if anyone, that had them. My family wasn't broke, but we weren't really wealthy either, and the only person in my family that had one was my dad, and it was more for work. So I didn't really have a way to call and ask where she was. All I could do was just wait for her to show up. I'd been talking with my other friends, dancing, enjoying the festivities, but still kept in mind that I hadn't seen Kayla, now several hours into the dance. I was disappointed, but assumed that maybe she had just decided not to go after all. It was getting pretty close to the end, and my friend offered to take me home, but I actually wanted to check on Kayla, so I declined and explained why. She understood, and we parted ways as she left. My mom had planned to pick me up at a certain time, so I decided to use the restroom and take my heels off while I waited for her. While I was washing my hands, I noticed something in my peripheral vision. I was in the school restroom, so I knew it was just someone else using it, and I didn't even bother looking up. That was until I heard a familiar voice say my name. When I looked up, I saw Kayla standing behind me. She wasn't wearing her dress though, but jeans and a zip-up jacket. She had makeup on, which she normally didn't, but you could tell that she'd been crying because it was running down her face. I was happy to see her at first, but then immediately became concerned when I saw her state. I asked her what was wrong and went to approach her when she stepped back. She then told me that she didn't understand why I was being so nice to her because she didn't deserve it. She said she was supposed to just fade into the background and never be in the way again, and that I had ruined that. I was confused at first with her saying this. I thought maybe that I had done something wrong. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded up piece of paper. She held it out and asked me not to read it until I got home because she didn't want to ruin my night. She thanked me for showing her kindness and then walked out of the restroom. I just stood there confused for a while and then walked out as well. I kept fidgeting with the paper, wanting to read it, but also trying to follow her wishes. I had no idea what the letter could say. I knew that my mom would be there soon, based on the time, and since I was waiting out front, my curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to read it. I don't have it memorized, nor do I really want to go into the detail of what all it said, but to summarize it, I learned that the girl that I saw her with was her older sister. She was a senior and we were juniors. She did not get along with her sister, due to how differently they were treated by her parents. In the letter, she confessed to some pretty dark things that she wanted to do to herself and her sister. But then, when I started talking to her, she was conflicted. She was convinced that I was just doing this to embarrass her or out of guilt or something to get her to go to prom. So she was going to include me in those plans, but Then she decided that I was a lot more genuine than that, so she fell back into feeling like she was the person in the wrong, and she didn't deserve to be alive, making hints on what she was going to do instead. My heart dropped when I read all this, and I knew that I needed to find her. I didn't want her to be alone in such a dark mindset, so I went back into the school to see if I could find her or if anyone else had seen her. No luck there. Then I saw my mom walking into the front doors. Now, I was really close to my mother, and I told her just about everything, so I told her my concerns, and then showed her the letter. She was thinking a lot more clearly than I was, and took me back inside to tell someone of the faculty that was there. We then drove to her home. My mom talked to her mom, and asked if she had seen her, explaining the situation. It hurt my heart to see how little care her mother had for the situation. We just told her that her daughter, who was currently missing, had confessed to wanting to end her life and possibly her sister's. And she just seemed more annoyed, and treated it like she was just being dramatic. My mom had more concern than she did, so we just left to continue searching. We did call the cops and report it to them as well, and they also agreed to look around, but couldn't do much since her own parents didn't report it. We went home, me completely distraught and thinking that that may have been the last time I'd ever see this new friend that I had made. That night was intensely restless for me. My mom came into my room that morning and told me that we had a message on our machine from Kayla's mom. She said that Kayla was at the hospital and gave us the room number, and that was about it. My mom, of course, offered to take me up there, and I didn't hesitate. I didn't know what I would see, but I didn't expect to see her sitting in a room, drawing in a book with music playing. This wasn't a normal hospital that you would go to when you were sick. At least, not physically. However, she looked happy. We got to talk while my mom waited outside, and she explained her thought process more. And I learned a lot more about her and how her brain worked. I had no idea about her home life and how deep her thoughts went. Overall, her parents touted how perfect of a child her older sister was, and neglected Kayla a lot. She always got great grades, but it was never good enough, so she tried acting out instead. But because I saw her for Kayla, and not her academics or her sister, she thought that once again she was the problem. I can't help but think what could have happened if I didn't keep interjecting into her life. This was many years ago, and Kayla and I have become really close. She actually moved in with us after she left the hospital and finished her last year of high school from home. Her parents seemed to truly not care, which was heartbreaking. I know there wasn't much that may have happened in this story, but the possibility of what could have happened was pretty terrifying, especially in the moment. That prom could have ended with multiple people dead or seriously injured. So, overall, people, just be kind to one another. We really never know what someone else is going through. So, that, my friends, was a collection of some scary prom stories. Definitely some terrifying stories in there. Not just people, but nature as well. And, yeah, I did not go to my prom. Neither junior nor senior year. Patience didn't go to hers either. We went to homecoming one year, and that was about it. We were together at that point in time. We got together back in 2007, so we've been together a long time. We just didn't go to prom. It was just something that we both decided not to do. Didn't really seem like an exciting night. I will say that neither one of us was part of the, I don't want to say this negatively, but neither one of us was part of the in crowd, if you will, the popular kids, so It just didn't seem like a night that we would have enjoyed. Yeah. Neither one of us got invited to our high school reunions either, which is pretty silly. Though she just mentioned that she didn't have one because COVID happened, so I did. And yeah, no, I wasn't invited. There was like 7 people that showed up because that's all they invited, so. In a class of 230 people, 7 showed up to the reunion. Good stuff. That's, it's not good percentages. It's like, what, 3.1%? Anyways, hopefully you all enjoyed the stories. If you did, please hit that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing. Got plenty more coming up, I promise you that. This video is kind of an oddball, I know, but still a good one. Coming out on a Friday. At 4:17 I'm recording this, so I have an hour and 15 minutes to get this up, so I gotta hurry. Yeah, subscribe, like, comment your thoughts. Did you go to prom? Did you go to homecoming? Did you go to any of the dances? Did you have that school spirit to do stuff like that? Because I didn't, so if you did, let me know. Talk to me in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. You can also do super thanks, join the Patreon, join memberships, all that fun stuff, but never expected, always appreciated. And of course, my friends, until I see you again, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important. Never forget it, and never let anyone tell you otherwise. And, my friends, till then, much love, and sleep well.